Discourses by Meher Baba, Volume 3, Qualifications of the Aspirant, Part 1, Entering the Realities of Inner Life, pages 112 to 117, 6th edition, reading by Marian Lewis. Value and limitations of external conformity. Though God realization is the ultimate destiny of all persons, there are very few who have the necessary preparation for the early fulfillment of that glorious destiny. The mind of the worldly minded is darkened by a thick layer of accumulated sanskaras, which must be considerably weakened for the aspirant even to enter the path. The usual method for gradually dissipating the load of sanskaras is to follow as strictly as possible the external code of religious rituals and ceremonies. This stage of external conformity to religious injunctions or traditions is known as the pursuit of Shariat or Karma Kanda. It covers actions like the offering of daily prayers, visiting of holy places, performance of duties prescribed by scriptures, and observance of well-established rules of the ethical codes generally accepted by the moral consciousness of the times. The stage of external conformity is useful in its own way as a spiritual discipline, but it is by no means free from evil effects, for it not only tends to make a man dry, rigid, and mechanical, but it often nourishes some kind of subtle egotism. However, most persons are attached to the life of external conformity because they find it the easiest way of placating their uneasy consciences. Passing on to realities of inner life. The soul often spends several lives in gathering the lessons of external conformity, but there always comes a time when it tires of external conformity and becomes more interested in the realities of the inner life. When the worldly man takes to this higher kind of search, he might be said to have become an aspirant. Like the insect which passes on through metamorphosis to the next stage of existence, the soul transcends the phase of external conformity. That is, Shariat or Karma Kanda, and enters upon the path of spiritual emancipation. That is, Tarikat or Moksha Marga. In this higher phase, the soul is no longer satisfied by external conformity with certain rules, but wants to acquire those qualifications which would make its inner life spiritually beautiful. Limitations of conventions. From the point of view of the realities of inner life, the life of external conformity may often be spiritually barren, and a life which deviates from such rigid conformity may often be spiritually rich. In seeking conformity with established conventions and formality, a man is almost always prone to slip into a life of false or illusory values, rather than a life which is based upon true and lasting values. What is conventionally recognized need not always be spiritually sound. On the contrary, many conventions express and embody illusory values, since they have come into existence as a result of the working of average minds, which are spiritually ignorant. Illusory values are mostly conventional because they grow into that matrix of mentality which is most common. This does not mean that conventions necessarily embody nothing but illusory values. Freedom from conventions must be based upon critical thought. Sometimes people stick to unconventional things for no other reason than that they are out of the ordinary. The unusual nature of their pursuits or interests enables them to feel their separateness and difference from others, and to take delight in it. Unconventional things also often generate interest merely through their novelty, in contrast with conventional things. The illusory values of usual things become insipid through familiarity, and the mind then has a tendency to transfer the illusion of value to those things which are not usual, instead of trying to discover true and lasting values. Transcending the stage of external conformity does not imply a merely mechanical and thoughtless change from conventionality to unconventionality. Such change would be essentially in the nature of reaction and could in no way contribute towards a life of freedom and truth. The freedom from conventionality, which appears in the life of the aspirant, is not due to any uncritical reaction, but is due to the exercise of critical thought. Those who would transcend the stage of external conformity and enter into the high life of inner realities must develop the capacity to distinguish between false and true values, irrespective of conventionality or unconventionality. Discrimination between true and false. The rise from Shariat or Karma Kanda to Tarikat or Moksha Marga is not to be interpreted, therefore, as being merely a departure from external conformity. It is not a change from conventionality to idiosyncrasy, from the usual to the unusual, but it is a change from a life of thoughtless acceptance of established traditions to a mode of being which is based upon thoughtful appreciation of the difference between the important and the unimportant. It is a change from a state of implicit ignorance to a state of critical thoughtfulness. At the stage of mere external conformity, the spiritual ignorance of man is often so complete that he does not even realize that he is ignorant. But when the person is being awakened and enters the path, he begins by realizing the need for true light. In the initial stages, the effort to attain this light takes the form of intellectual discrimination between the lasting and the transitory, the true and the false, the real and the unreal, the important and the unimportant. Bankruptcy of barren beliefs. For the spiritual aspirant, however, it is not enough to exercise merely intellectual discrimination between the false and the true. Though intellectual discrimination is undoubtedly the basis for all further preparation, it yields its fruit only when newly perceived values are brought into relation with practical life. From the spiritual viewpoint, what matters is not theory, but practice. The ideas, beliefs, opinions, views, or doctrines which a person might hold intellectually constitute a superficial layer of human personality. Very often, a person believes in one thing and does exactly the opposite. The bankruptcy of barren beliefs is all the more pitiable because the person who feeds upon them often suffers from the delusion that he is spiritually advanced when, in truth, he has not even begun spiritual life. Dogmas and creeds. Sometimes even a wrong view, which is held with fervor, may indirectly invite an experience that opens out the gates to the spiritual life. Even at the stage of Shariat, or Karmakanda, allegiance to religions is not infrequently a source of inspiration for many selfless and noble acts. For, while these dogmas or creeds are blindly accepted, they are often held with a fervor and enthusiasm which supply a dynamic element to the ideology which has been accepted by the person for the moment. Dogmas and creeds, as compared with barren views and doctrines, have the distinct advantage of being embraced not only by the intellect, but also by the heart. They cover and affect a wider part of personality than purely theoretical opinions. Cause of evil results of dogmas and creeds. Dogmas and creeds generally, however, are as much a source of evil as of good, because in them the guiding vision is clouded owing to degeneration or suspension of critical thinking. If allegiance to creeds and dogmas has sometimes done good to the individual or to the community to which he belongs, it has more often done harm. Though the mind and heart are involved in allegiance to dogmas and creeds, both function in such case under the serious handicap of suspension of thought. Hence, dogmas and creeds do not contribute to unmixed good. Need for putting theory into practice. When a person gives up uncritically accepted dogmas and creeds in favor of views and doctrines to which he has devoted thought, there is a certain amount of advance insofar as his mind has now begun to think and critically examine its beliefs. Very often, however, the newly held beliefs are seen to lack the fervor and enthusiasm which characterized allegiance to dogmas and creeds. If these newly held beliefs lack motive power, they belong only to the superficial aspect of life, and they hang loosely upon the person like an overcoat. The mind has been emancipated from the domination of uncultured emotion, but this is often achieved by sacrificing the cooperation of the heart. If the results of critical thought are to be spiritually fruitful, they must again invade and recapture the heart so as to enlist its cooperative functioning. In other words, the ideas which have been accepted after critical examination must again be released into active life if they are to yield their full benefit. In the process of practical life, they often undergo a healthy transformation and become more soundly interwoven with the very fabric of life. Critical and creative thinking promotes balance of mind and heart. The transition from external conformity, that is, Shariat or Karmakanda, to the life of inner realities, that is, Tarikat or Moksha Marga, involves two steps. One, freeing the mind from the inertia of uncritical acceptance based upon blind imitation and stirring it to critical thinking. And two, bringing the results of critical and discriminative thinking into practical life, In order to be spiritually fruitful, thinking must be not only critical, but creative. Critical and creative thinking leads to spiritual preparation by cultivating those qualities which contribute towards the perfection and balancing of the mind and the heart, and the release of unfettered divine life. Jai Baba.